Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. Instead of talking about books right now, I'm going to be looking at my top 10 favorite movies. Isn't anything. There's no particular ranking to this because I came up with it um, kind of on the spot, and I've had meaning to have an idea talking about movies because I feel like they kind of cinema and literature and any of the other arts for that matter, often kind of touch boundaries a lot of the times. So I figured it would be worth discussing some of my top 10. Um, Now, like I said, some of these aren't like there's no particular ranking because I feel like I said about books, like there's no strict way because like there will be one day where one movie will be like, even if it's like a kind of lesser known indie movie that's like shot on a really low budget, can also have the exact same kind of effect of, can be as just as impactful and meaningful as say, something shot on millions of dollars. So, definitely that those are in consideration, but for what it's worth, here's kind of what I have listed. Number one being Synecdoche, New York. So as much as I don't want to pick a favorite, I'd say like this is probably one of my all-time favorites anyway. It just kind of comes to my head when I think about like choice top 10 like desert island desk type of things. Take it to a desert island. That's kind of what I bring with me is like that. And it's one of those movies that definitely you have to keep seeing over and over again in order to kind of pick up, and like every time you see it you pick up and glean something new. With this one, it's you know uh, as much as I'm horrible at remembering details, it's directed by and written by Charlie Kaufman, one of my all-time favorite like screenwriters slash directors slash authors too. I actually have his book Ant Kind here somewhere, which is great in its own way. But more so, I know him from his movies, adaptation, being John Malkovich, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which is like one of the most famous, probably well known, respected, kind of kind of romantic films. It's considered that, but it's a lot deeper than that. Like a lot of his films. Um, what else am I missing here? I'm thinking of ending things more recently, based off of a great Ian Reid novel, which I felt he gave a lot of due credit to by directing that. And probably he did some. Oh yeah, Anomalisa. Sorry, that one's also really great as well. It's different because it has puppetry involved in it too. But so enough spouting my obvious fandom of Charlie Kaufman. The movie, without spoiling it too much, it's about this theater director named Caden Cartard, who wins a MacArthur Fellow grant for creative, which is basically, given to, exemplary artists, and he displays such qualities, and he is granted this. So now he has kind of like way more ability and is able to reach a further audience, and then he ends up getting this great big set where he creates like this simulacrum, this which is why it's called Synecdoche, because it's actually it's almost a homonym with Schenectady, I think. Well, actually, a Schenectady is the city. There's a city. There's actually Synecdoche on its own means, I think, something like a part of something that's whole. So when somebody says their boots or something, referring to themselves or something. So yeah, it's just, and it deals with death a lot, which is why it's very potent. It's one of those things that are very hard to watch, and it's like, so dismal at times, but it's kind of showing the truth of art being life, or art being, and there's been so many different analyses, and I know Adam from your movie sucks.org did like a very comprehensive, thorough, like it's 10-part review or something. Maybe it's more than that, but yeah, it's definitely something that I'd feel like there's no words that can be said about it. It's just like it's an individual experience that you kind of have to watch on your own terms, and you pick out something new every time, I'm going to watch it again, you know. And in fact, I'm trying to, because it's been 3 times, I think, so I'm trying to actually space it out, so I'm like every year, because like the older I get, the more I identify with it, and then I'm like, oh, that thing that I kind of thought was a little bit intense or unrealistic or too miserable or something, and maybe like then that starts to hit you a lot harder when you kind of get older. So and I'm not even that old, but so yeah, there's a lot more to say on that. Second movie would be Come and See, which I actually have the DVD of, which is probably I believe Criterion Collection here, and another film that's very, very, very depressing. It's a war film. Well, it's actually more particularly anti-war film. And kind of in the vein of like Kubrick, who started out doing a lot of anti-war films with like Paths of Glory and stuff, which I'll get to more later on. But you know, again, this is one of those movies that no amount of describing it will really give you. It's one of those individual experiences that you have to garner yourself. So, but it's about this. It's this true story about I believe the name of the Belarusian man who, little boy at the time during the war, Second World War, in Belarus, at the time was Belarusia, and I believe his name was Ales Edemovich, I believe, and he suffered under the horrendous, like very just like horrific, like genocide, like mass murders and burnings of all these different villages. I believe there's like hundreds of different villages throughout, and one of them was called Katyn, I think, and that's a village that he talks about in his book. I have somewhere. I believe it's pronounced Katyn, and it's by Ales Edemovich. So he survived that as a boy, and it's like loosely. It's told from. There's like some slight variations to his own life. And from what I've seen, the movie takes a little bit of its own type of variations as well, and in respect of artistic type of thing, and a little bit about the director, Elem Klimov, a Russian Soviet director, who was kind of contemporaries with Tarkovsky, Andrei Tarkovsky, which is also going to get into later. They actually went to a Moscow film school, the Moscow Film School, together, and I'm not sure if they're like friends or anything, but they knew each other definitely, or they knew of one another at some point. I think they, but yeah, and it kind of shows like he's definitely this film isn't a suspended, subjective, artistic. It's not purely. It is definitely artistic. It's definitely creative, but it just shows a reflection of the pure. It's just holding up like a mirror to what the Nazis did, and not to just single out just one group. There's so many different people. Like, talk about what Stalin did to his own, to his own country throughout the 20th century. I mean, you could talk about Solzhenitsyn all day, but yeah, like he's holding up this mirror to what the Nazis did, because it was so nobody was really talking about it, is what I think the director said. He's like, wait, I need to make a movie about this because nobody's talking about, like, they talk about what happened at like all the in like Warsaw, Poland, and like the uprising and all the massacres and all these different villages got burned down, but like nobody talks about this. And basically the movie, it just follows this little boy. I think his name is Asian. I could be wrong. He's just like a very young, I think 12 or 13 years old, totally innocuous, just like, like immaculate young boy, son of a farmer, and his father, I believe, is gone at this point, like off to fight in the resistance. So it's like to be conscripted into kind of this ragtag army, and it's only a matter of time until he's also, because I think it's strongly implied that the father dies, but without giving too much away, he's basically thrust into this scenario where he, like these two starts right off the bat, with him digging up these rifles, and there's there's a warning, and they're admonished for it harshly by one of the village elders, who warns them not to do that because there's like Nazi planes like going back and forth that are tracking and surveilling the area, like ready to, drop in paratroopers and whatnot and lay waste to land. And this, they're just little boys, and him and his friend are just kind of like digging up these rifles because they have no other way of defending themselves if any harm comes, which it definitely is. And essentially what happens is that they are the main character is thrown into the conscripted army, and there's a name for it. It's not a militia, but it's like a people's type of like very loose type of army that's kind of, it's like something that's brought up. It's not like, because Belarus and Poland and all these different places, Ukraine, they were very like, basically like the seeds, from what I know, of like very peasant communities. Like they were very simple villages, and they didn't have a lot of resources or infrastructure or anything, or centralized government. They just had like like this one overlooking type of, I don't know if it's similar to the Tsarist Russia, but yeah, it's like, or so some type of overlooking Soviet type of Russia that was keeping them in order. And like they didn't really have any resources, so they basically, scallywags are kind of trying to defend themselves. And the whole entire movie, it's just like I was, at least my, like, as horrific as it was, and as just like completely like abysmally depressing as it was, like my eyes were glued to the screen and I couldn't look away, because you get this fly on the wall observation of this young kid, as he's just like walking through the forest, and and she's a fair deal older than him. I think he's like 13 and she's like supposed to be 17 or 16 maybe. And this is where it actually does kind of like line up with the book a lot. But yeah, so she's kind of like the vague love interest of him, like, but he's just this confused young man. They're both thrust into this situation, and she's like up in arms because she's been kind of dumped or ignored by her. I can't remember the man's name, but he's the one of the officers of this militia group that's they're getting ready to kind of covertly sneak into the woods and try to like ambush the Germans, I believe. And they're both kind of like, the rest of the movie, they kind of like, they're joined at the hip almost, because they're running around trying to find, and it's just like bullets whizzing, and like it's just, there's like chaos, there's bombs shelling, and there's like some magic realism scenes that remind me a bit of like, say, Tarkovsky a little bit, where it's just like you see kind of like, I think it's a Khrushchev effect, where you see like his face and battered, and then you see like a different shot of something, like you see like a shot of the young girl near the end, not to give too much away, and like you see his face, and like in reaction, it turned out like the whole entire time he wasn't looking at her, like he was looking at somebody else, he was looking off into the distance. There's somebody, I think cinematography did a good take on this film as well. The only thing is that I think some people read a little bit too much into it, which is great because there's so much to read into, but at the same time I feel like it takes away just a little bit of the terror of it, like the fact that there's also an aspect of this film which is just ruthless, and that's just what war is. I mean, think about it. If your community, your home is just completely run over, and it doesn't have to be anything, it could be anything, it just be hatred breeds up one day, and just people have a burgeoning and a hankering just to kill somebody someday, and there's groups, and your peaceful little land is all of a sudden just infringed, and your everything is just, I'm just saying this descriptively, like I'm just saying like this is what it was in that time. This was like, there was no logic to it. There's no, it's just like this one, it's a very stoic type of thing, it's like, well, prepare yourself for the worst day, because like you don't know when it's coming. And I think it's, oddly enough, I think it's healthy in some ways to negatively visualize on death in that sense, not just in a peaceful way. And like definitely that's a great way of kind of looking down the line, you know, of your the grand, you know, scale of your life. But I think for the most part, I think it's also very helpful just every once in a while, I think, to like think about like the worst way that you could, you know, like it could be crime in your city, or it could be anything. It's just like these are the types of things that, you know, they're on the least of your list of like worries. It's just like, well, my health, my diet, this, and my family and all that. And it's just like, yeah, those are all great, you know, careers, relationships and all that. But what if, like, think about like how everything, when it's just survival, when you're just trying to escape the bombing of something, you're just trying to escape and find, you know, and it's not even in a spiritual way, and it's because I really love, you know, the idea of like an artistic type of thing, or like a malaise coming from, you know, some type of like NY or something, like. But at the same time, I also think there's it, as much as it seems like this past is behind us, it, like, any day, like, war could start again, and, you know, like the whole entire same can of worms could be cut open again. And again, this isn't about any nationality. This isn't harkening on anything, saying like, oh, this is a film that's anti-German. You know, even though I believe the director is actually saying that he was planning on calling it "Kill Hitler." But, and you can see that near the end, like the young boy takes a rifle and, you know, shoots a photograph of Hitler, and then, but, from what I remember, it shows like this montage cut, this very dramatic montage of showing Hitler, like a chronology of Hitler's life, I think, back to when he was a baby. So it's like kind of insinuating that everybody at some point was like innocent. So yeah, like there's so much more to be said about that, but that is one of my favorite films, definitely. Although I try not to, it's definitely not something I want to, you know, watch to, like, if you're in a bad mood, or if you want to, it's definitely something that you want to like stow away and be like, well, because it will like affect you. Like, you, like, I was bowled over reading about, you know, Operation Barbarossa and Hitler, and how Hitler wanted to enslave 2/3 of like the Slavic population because their name was Slavish, right? So I was just fascinated and disgusted, obviously, by how like you always hear kind of like a fair share. It's like you think like Hitler at the end of the day, it's like, well, he is like one of the most hated people, but it does make sense when you hear it from like the point of view of seeing these like the brigade of, I think, what were they called, the Dirlewanger Brigade was actually, sickly enough, that they were completely run and comprised of a group of dissident, subversive, like, criminals in society. Like, they took rapists like Oscar I think his name, Dirlewanger, and they promoted him to like major or general or something, and they put him in charge of the brigade. And it's like, this is the Skywags, this is what you're gonna do. You're gonna go into, like, you know, you're gonna go into the Soviet areas, into Ukraine, Poland, Belarus, but, you know, and you're just gonna lay waste, burn everything down, and, you know, and like that's the worst part of all, is the church part. Like the burning church scene and at the end of Come and See is like the most harrowing, like, just like awful thing I've ever seen. Like, I'm just at a loss of words. It's just so, you know, it's not filmed in this glamorous, like, it's not like you see some directors do a thing where they'll slyly hint at something. It's like, this man was a child molester and he did this and this and this, and like, of course you're not going to show it, but like, or this person then got shot, or, you know, was murdered by this, you know, by a hitman or something, and then it shows like, you know, silhouettes or something much more subdued and left open to the imagination. But what Klimov does is he does none of that, and that's why I think it's brilliant, because it's just a stark through the eyes of this child, and which can be wary and skewered because he's so exhausted and fatigued, and you can see that at the end of the movie. He's just like completely, you know, his face is pruned, and his hair, and like his once boyish hair, is just like frazzled and almost gone, and he's just like underweight, and I feel bad for the kid that had to play him. I don't think he got into acting again. I think he was like, oh yeah, the director treated me and made sure that I was like emotionally prepared before the shoot, to see like psychologists and therapists and stuff. But I think after the shoot, like he was definitely like, I looked up his like IMDb credits, and there's like nothing. So he's just like, okay, yeah, I think I'm done. I've had my fill of movies for like, probably my whole life. This one, this one guy really ruined it for me. But no, that's just me drawing my own conclusions. Who knows? Maybe there's more to that. But yeah, that's probably one of my all-time favorites. Moving on. Camera's probably gonna die any second. Try to make these ones shorter. Friends is Magnolia, which came out in 1999. I didn't say the things about the other two ones. Oh yeah, Synecdoche, New York came out in 2008. I could probably always just like put a thing on later, the magic of post edit. Come and See came out in 1985, I believe. I probably messed that up. It's probably, I was right, 1985. And yeah, anyway, back to Magnolia, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. Came out in 1999. Another really, it took me a couple movies to get into Paul Thomas Anderson. I remember seeing, fittingly enough, There Will Be Blood, like in my like early to mid-teens or something. Didn't quite get all of it, like I didn't quite understand it, but I did. I was really like impressed with it. Obviously, it's just like as a tailored end. It's like as a piece of art, like it really is, holds up, I think. And it was a little bit dissuaded. I think I actually like kind of like slipped in and out, and I didn't watch the whole thing, but until like much later. But yeah, and it took me probably Magnolia, like it took me like a couple viewings to get it. In fact, I've only seen it twice. But I think it does. It's not like a perfect movie, but I really love the serendipity and the play on all these different characters converging, and it seems like it's sort of divergent at first, and then you're like, wait, why are we hearing about this, this like game show host guy, Jimmy Gator, I think, and his affairs and weird and his private life, and then his daughter who's addicted to coke and like is just like living an awful life, and then the cop played by John C. Reilly, I forget his name, but I just keep thinking about Steve Brule because you're thinking he's like, oh, he won an Academy Award, and an Oscar, I think, right? Or did he win both? But you're just thinking about that, and then you think of the fact he also played Dr. Steve Brule, which is, well, he always keeps up. I admire his tenacity, his willingness to keep up with the character, because he's always like, oh, it's Dr. Steve Brule and I are friends, and I just like help produce it or something. It's just like clearly. But anyway, enough diversions, even though this is aptly what I'm talking about. But no, I liked the movie, loved it, obviously. Wonderful soundtrack by Amy Mann, who does a wonderful cover of like One, and like that's like one of my favorite opening sequences ever, is like starting off right with that type of like dun 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 dun, one is the loneliest number. She does that, and it's just very haunting, and kind of like you're just thrust into this montage of different things. And I'd say if you don't like Paul Thomas Anderson, if you, for no other reason than just his intro montage, intro cold openings, I guess you say, like Boogie Nights, even though I wasn't like terribly enthused by Boogie Nights upon first viewing, I was definitely like completely roped in and bought by the first like few minutes of like seeing that, like, fly on the wall. Fly on the wall observation of kind of a floating camera, and I think it was a steady cam. So, but yeah, very impressive. I feel bad because I've yet to see Hard 8, although I've heard it got mixed reviews, but that's not going to dissuade me. I just haven't. That's why I'm not entirely sure if I should be like, oh, I'm a fan of his, because like sometimes then, but then I've also haven't seen like this film or that film, and it's like, but you know, I've like at least maybe half to 3/4 of his filmography I've seen, so I hope I have a good enough rooting to be able to criticize him on certain things or call myself a fan of his, but I'd say so. Phantom Thread was obviously very wonderful, but that's not on my list, so I'm not going to talk about that, but so yeah, a little bit more why I love Magnolia. Again, there's nothing really can be said. I mean, it might just be a hunch. There, yeah, like I said, I love the interplay of characters kind of running independent of each other, all these different narrations, and they're all tied together by kind of an absurd, it was like quintessentially postmodern type of thing. Kind of reminds you of Pynchon in the sense of the frogs raining from the sky, which is also interesting because he also adapted a Pynchon book novel for the film Inherent Vice, which I have seen. So yeah, I definitely say yeah. The only slight downside of the film was like I think it mired a little bit too much in the people's problems of like their like certain things like you know, like the one William H. Macy's character getting braces to like impress one of his kind of love interest in the film, and it's kind of, and that's fine, but like I felt like it was a little bit too like, you're like, it's like, I'm not sure, like maybe an unrealistic type of thing, or maybe the way that John C. Reilly's character kind of falls for the addicted woman who's like you know, at a low point in her life, kind of hot mess type of thing, and the way he kind of like, oh, he's just so doting is like a little bit, you know, it's like one of those things where it's like, is it maybe a bit of a fantasy that maybe she'd be it like, or is it just because she sees you as this like benevolent caretaker and she loves you for who you are, or she just see you as kind of like, oh, I'll just take advantage of your niceness or something. But I'm not sure, maybe he did realize that, maybe I don't have a place for criticizing that, but those are just like slight criticisms on my part. So yeah, next on the list is Stalker, Andrei Tarkovsky, released in 1977. I'm gonna get that wrong. It's probably 78, right? Yeah, this is an experience. I actually have a poster, you can probably see in other videos, it might be in the background of that, the one zone area, but yeah, it's one of those films that it's so dialogue based, and you have these characters brought together, and it's based off a novel by a Soviet science fiction author. It was called Stalker. I don't think it was actually called Stalker. It might have been called something different, but dang, I almost had his name for a second. I'll add it in post. But yeah, it's that being said, Tarkovsky definitely imbues his own his own modus operandi, and auteur type of thing. You didn't quite see that in his earlier movies, like Ivan's Childhood, or Ivan, I think is a Russian way of saying it. You actually see a little bit more of a kind of like a less reflective of his, you know, interiority or his auteurness. Like you kind of seen him stepping back a little bit, and it's kind of the same way that David Lynch did Elephant Man, where you don't see as much Lynchian nightmare stuff. So yeah, I definitely say it's definitely one of those films, like it is stream of conscious. It's, you know, like there's a lot of different allusions to Soviet Russia, and kind of like the depressing kind of abandoned stark zone area where there's like tunnels, and you know people are mining for this stuff, and I am a bit hazy on it because you know, the devil is in the details, or maybe that's not the right phrase I'm looking for. Anyway, but yeah, it's very dreamlike, very like most of Tarkovsky's films. But you have these characters, like, one of them's like has a penchant for philosophizing. There's always, like, I noticed that, like, one or two Tarkovsky characters, like in Solaris or Demira, I think, and Nostalgia, and there's always like one or two of them that like philosophize a lot in a good way. But yeah, and but yeah, it's one of those films that leaves you kind of like not necessarily on a good note, not on a bad note, but I'd say it's, for me, it's tied with it's tied almost with Solaris and Nostalgia, or I'm sorry, The Sacrifice. The Sacrifice was one of his last, and tragically enough, Tarkovsky actually passed away due to inhaling some of the toxic fumes on, I believe, the set of The Sacrifice when they were burning down that house, and they had to do it in one take, and it was like this very long take at the end of the film, and I think that's how he passed away, is like, at the age of like literally in his like 50s, like mid 50s maybe, along with, tragically enough too, a few of the actors that played with him on that star in the film, and I think one of them was Anatolia Solzhenitsyn, I think, who also starred in a lot of his different movies. So yeah, he was kind of like Tarkovsky's like Philip Seymour Hoffman for like Paul Thomas Anderson. So yeah, it's definitely it's toss up between those three. Solaris definitely had a very, I believe that's also based off a science fiction movie. It got some allusions to Kubrick, like, or comparisons to Kubrick, but I think Tarkovsky kind of didn't like denounce them, but kind of like took some distance away from that, or he distanced himself away from those comparisons, because he thought that like Kubrick's films were a little bit more on the pessimistic side, I think, whereas he was more on the spiritual. So yeah, and so those, it's almost like as if those are like three tied ones, because I kind of, they all affected me in the same way and roughly the same point in my life, kind of the same way that Khrushchev Kieslowski did as well with the three colors. It's kind of like impossible for me not to think of those, because when you try to think of the linear storyline, it's like, oh, well, it's Three Colors Red, what was it about? And it's like Irene Jacobs' character is a young lady that's like, breaks up with her, or her boyfriend dies in an accident, I think, or is that the other one? So yeah, it's definitely one of those things where you have to keep, like rewatching it, re-experiencing it anew. So fifth movie is Vanilla Sky, directed by Cameron Crowe. Came out in the year 2001. You thought I was going to make it a year 2000 joke. I wasn't, because I knew it was all along. It was 2001. And yeah, odd that I wouldn't really necessarily pick Cameron Crowe in his own work, because I actually not actually like a particular fan of him. Even Almost Famous, which I watched and liked for the most part, I'm kind of still iffy on. Like, there's still parts of it that seem like a little bit maybe glib or insouciant, or maybe I'm just not really getting the time that much. But like 70s bands and all these different, like cavalcade of different people, and like this young kid is just trying to like get this like responsible type of story out of it for his school, and he's just like thrown into this like mess, and it's just like, yeah, but it was all worth it. But like, was it though? I mean, his mother did say like, don't do X, Y, and Z, and he clearly did all those things. So it's like, that's where I'm at. So the moral part of me is like, oh, well, that's right. So that's clearly not right. But Vanilla Sky, contrasting with that, I think is definitely one of Crowe's best. It's just, it's definitely, I think it got a little bit of short-sighted at like when it came out, and it might be due because it was like coterminous with 9/11, kind of when they were releasing it, so they might not have thought that the storyline or something in it might not have bode well with people Hollywood at the time. So but yeah, Tom Cruise does a really great performance in it. kind of wish I'd see him do a little bit more of these types of roles rather than nothing wrong with it, Mission Impossible action films or anything like that. I'm not trying to be a classic Cruise hater. I mean, I do, he was in Eyes Wide Shut, he was in Minority Report and Magnolia. I just talked about, like, it's weird because it's like I don't really think of him as like a super favorite actor, because he's like as much a stunt man type personality as he is an actor, which is perfectly fine. I mean, you had all the types of people, like maybe like Clark Gable or Humphrey Bogart in those days, were very much personalities, or Greta Garbo, so you didn't have, but there's nothing wrong with that, I don't think, being kind of like having that type of, is it like his personality influencing the film, or is it just like he's just so good at giving, just not phoning it in, totally giving it his all in both like the psychological realm and the physical realm, along with Penelope Cruz. And again, like another cast of characters that I don't really think as being super like high on my list, but like just like in this one, like they did a stellar job. So yeah, I mean, again, you have to watch for yourself, but it's very dreamy. Tom Cruise's character, David Ames, I believe, like is kind of stuck in a world where he's trying to, after the death of his father, he's trying to inherit this, really like maybe like really expensive, like kind of like high, like maintenance company, and he's like trying to take the easy way out and just like take the money kind of, but like these like group of older men, I guess, like are just holding him to it. And then there's that going on, but then there's also the other part where he's like in a car crash with this obsessive girl who played by Cameron Diaz, who also did a fantastic job too, and she basically, without giving too much away, like when he agrees to take like a seemingly kind of like casual car ride with her, it like ends drastically, and from there you don't really know if it's dream or not, and it's just like it plays with your expectations throughout the whole thing, and it's just like great. So then there's Gone Girl, which is also a tie with The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Definitely anything by Fincher as well. I think he's definitely up on my tier list if I had to choose. Like definitely like probably in my top 5 at least. And yeah, both of them stellar. I keep saying that word. Fantastic films. I'm gonna focus more on Gone Girl because I feel like if I try to explain the plot to The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, I'm just gonna get like a headache. But yeah, Gone Girl is definitely 2014, based off the book by Gillian Flynn, or is it Gillian Flynn? I think it's Gillian Flynn. And yeah, I've actually recently read that, semi-recently. I have it on my book stand here somewhere. So I might get to reviewing that sometime. Great film. Also one that plays with your expectations. You don't know whose side you're on. Amy Dunn's, Nick Dunn's, like they're at each other's throats sometimes, and it's just like, but at the same time they also need each other. There's definitely like a lot of like depth psychology to that. Like Amy is the shadow of Nick, and for what it's worth, Ben Affleck does a great job kind of playing that character. And part of the reason I think David Fincher chose him was like because of like the way he kind of was able to cook up phone calls. I think he said like the way he was kind of like able to brush off the fact that he was like possibly just maybe seeing other women at this at the time he was married. And yeah, so that's like kind of like an interesting thing, the way Rosamund Pike also plays it just like terrifically as well. Is just like this character that you totally just ruthless psychopath, this sociopath maybe, but at the same time you kind of identify with her plight. Like you're not left, because Flynn also co-wrote the script to it, like they just like directly adapted it rather than having like a screenwriter. Then you get like a weird type of middleman type of thing going on where the creative distilling it, distillation kind of ruins it maybe. So you definitely kind of get like a really good, true to the book type of thing. So again, so many videos on that topic. But yeah. And the girl with the dragon tattoo, another great one. Rooney Mara does a fantastic job. I definitely say she's like in top tier of like actors that are one of my favorites. And yeah, like it's just totally one of the. It's like a similar thing with the in Gone Girl, where Elizabeth Salander is very you identify with her in some sense, but then other times you're kind of repulsed by her decisions, and you're kind of just rooting for her and Blomkvist, who played by Daniel Craig, and you kind of see a different side of Daniel Craig's performances. Like you kind of see like a lot of the stoic type of man's man Bond, and then I think Mikhail Blomkvist, I think is his, a lot of Swedish names, right, a lot. But yeah, like I like to read it sometime. I have not read it yet. Stieg Larsson's book, who passed away, I think, sometime in the last decade, I think. Rest in peace. So yeah, but like I was saying, Daniel Craig is just playing kind of like this almost middling, still like, like obviously he's like kind of like, in the middle of an affair at the start of the movie, and he's like kind of like his life isn't really in order, to put it in a Jordan Peterson type of way. But yeah, you kind of, despite him being kind of like a little bit on the like underwhelming as like a character, you kind of like see them kind of complement each other. And okay, where was I? Girl with a Dragon Tattoo, definitely a tie with Gone Girl. Maybe Fight Club down there too. It's definitely. I feel like I'm a little bit afraid to come out of the, and admit, to be like, oh, I love the movie Fight Club, because then so much baggage that comes with it. Like, oh, you mean you love Tyler Durden? And you're just like, no, I actually find a lot of his stuff like really kind of repelling, and the fandom coming along with it too, that accompanies it, is very problematic as well. So, not to say you can't just enjoy the movie and be like, well, that was a good psychological type of Jungian type of shadow type thing going on with the narrator and Tyler Durden, and kind of him trying to find identity in a postmodern kind of post society where there's not really any room for hunter-gatherers, and trying to find identity in anything. It's just like, so that's, yeah. And I also read the book too, so might get around to reviewing that. Another thing on my to-do list, so constantly just compiling forever. Next is Parasite. I actually didn't get around to seeing this one. Needs no introduction. Obviously, Bong Sing. Oh my gosh, I'm so butchering that name. Bong Joon-ho. Bong Sung-ho. I'm going to get this right. Bear with me. Bong Sing. Bong Joon-ho. Bong Joon-ho. I'm sorry. I'm going to cut that out and make it seem like I was so perfect with it on the first, nailing it the first time. That's kind of what I want to do. So yeah, this actually didn't get around to seeing till like at least semi-recently, a few months ago, and yeah, I don't know what I was waiting for. I think I was like kind of in a haze of movies that came out in 2019 that were Oscar picks, like Uncut Gems and Joker, which I like both of them, but I feel like they were like a little bit, like the residue of them was just pervading and for months and years and years and years, and it was just kind of like, okay, we get it. So it left kind of a bad taste in my mouth for watching Parasite, but when I finally got down around to it, I was just like, wow, this is just great. It's a very unique take on like class desperation, or especially through a South Korean mindset, and kind of how each one of them, I didn't know that what it was. I was expecting it to be actually like a science fiction, like the first time I heard about it, until I like read like a quick summary, and I was like, oh, it's about like class differences between, and how the one class kind of like usurps and kind of sneaks its way into the other, and it's just like, whoa. Because again, it's like common theme with all these movies is that you're rooting for no one in particular, but if you had to, you're kind of like veering more on the lower class family that's kind of like working its way into this rich, like affluent, well off family. They're kind of because they're superficial, they're kind of vain, and they're like the one man actually literally says that, like, the other man smells like he smells like a homeless man, and he smells awful, it's that horrible stench. And obviously that's kind of like the last, the straw that breaks the camel back, not to spoil it. So yeah, it's just great because you're like, as much as the tactics are perfidious and like dishonest, like you can tell that you just kind of like, I don't know, at the end of the day they're the underdog, and you kind of like vouch for them. But in the end, it's just, I'm not even gonna say the end, because it's just like, so dang, because there's so many, like, didn't see that coming parts of it, and it's so wonderfully constructed, and so yeah, moving on. It's like Being There, 1979, directed by Hal Ashby, starring Peter Sellers. Again, a movie I wouldn't really rewatch a million times over, and I feel bad because I only actually watched it once, but I feel like it's definitely a movie that it's with a plot that's so like static, but like effective somehow. And anybody who knows anything about the movie, without giving too much away, Peter Sellers is playing Chauncey Gardiner, which is obviously not his real name. I think he said his name was like, it's actually Chancey in the beginning, or he said it was, but he said he was a gardener, like he was a gardener for this rich, kind of like, what do I mean, not like super rich, but like kind of like, well, well off enough to afford the luxury of a gardener or somebody like that. So that's what his job was, and he kind of roomed with the family, and he's like very basic intelligence, and some Forrest Gump type similarities. Obviously Forrest Gump came out like 15 years after this, and not a big fan of Forrest Gump. I can go on about that and how kind of like a little bit it didn't age as well as I thought, like, and maybe it's because I watched it like a million times when I was a kid, that I can't really exercise certain things, or like watching it as a kid and you're just like, darn it. Maybe it's like a taste aversion where you kind of like identify certain things about it with maybe the drudgery of being a kid, so you're just like, why not this again? Like Lord of the Rings. I love Lord of the Rings, don't get me wrong. I love the books, and we grew up with it, like having it read aloud. But it is a pivotal part of our childhood. But yet every time I sit down to watch it, I'm just like, I can't watch it, because it's so, I've seen it too many times. It's cemented in my brain. Like, I don't know. So yeah. And don't even get me started on Star Wars, oh my gosh. So yeah, Being There, very clever, I think, because it's a commentary, basically, that Chauncey Gardiner, who stumbles on, it's just like a series of like happy accidents for him, because he's just like stumbles on like a confidant of the president, I think, and who's like, or somebody who's like at least very in the know and privy to the president, maybe, and like maybe a few steps down from him or something, and then he basically befriends him, and he's like, he's all of a sudden it's like beguiles them with his simple, plainly stated ways, and he's just like, I garden, I make sure I don't cut the roots too soon, and they find like his like mild mannered type of, like they find it to be very profound somehow. They start reading stuff into it, like they start like acting as if he's like some sort of like spiritual guru. And I found it's just like hilarious, but it's also a little bit off-putting, knowing that maybe it's also not too far from reality. Heck, it might even be, pretty much like what you see in real life, like people who just don't have any. It's more about like who you know and like the luck of the draw, I guess. Like you're just stumbling upon like, oh, I know you and you're friends with this person and I made an impression on you, and now you think I'm this super, this super deep, profound person. So, and throughout the movies, like kind of quickly stepping through the ladders. And the one man Shirley MacLaine's husband, I can't remember, passes away, and he kind of like that's like the moment that like at the end of the movie, without giving too much away, like it's implied that he can basically, like he's walking on water literally, because it's basically that's the. And there's also like a very funny homage to Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey with like this funk version of also Sprach Zarathustra, the by Richard Strauss, I believe, and it's it's kind of playing on that something so like magnificent and mammoth and of elaborate proportions, right? You're thinking of cinema, and like this is what like the mankind is in 2001 at least. But then you're like, this is what Peter Sellers just like very understated, just kind of like walking through the city. He's like he thinks a remote is a like he's like, what does this do? And he's like trying to figure it out. But yeah, moving on. Eyes Wide Shut came out in 1999. Stanley Kubrick, obviously. A lot of movies on here that are probably in the top 10 of pretty much anybody's ever. Like you go on the IMDb page and you see top 100 movies, and you're like, oh, pretty much all these movies are in there. I guarantee you, somewhere in the AFIs maybe too. I don't know, but yeah, that's kind of the kind of guy I am. I just like happen to like a lot of the movies that kind of all the other people like already. I guess it kind of takes away the work you have to do. You're like, well, there's all this crap that's coming out. I can't watch this next, like, She-Hulk, Attorney at Law, all these different variations of every single painful iteration of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like, I can't watch this crap. I have hardly enough time for good movies. So, anyway, Eyes Wide Shut, or anything by Kubrick. Feel bad because I have yet to watch his first few films. But yeah, definitely at least a tie between that, The Shining, obviously, just the psychological potency of it, and Stephen King's wonderful story to that, and how it, just like, the way it's shot is just like it's almost cozy, right? There's like a, you want to kind of see from afar maybe, but you don't want to actually hang out with the Torrances or anything in that hotel. So yeah, what can be said about that? What can be said about Eyes Wide Shut? It's actually based off of a novel or novella. I think it's actually called Something Dream, or A Lieber Something Dream, because it's actually by a German-Austrian person who I cannot remember the name of right now, but I'll look up. Dream Story by Arthur Schnitzler. I definitely like to read that sometime. But yeah, it's definitely a very, like, it's so much more social commentary upon watching it the second or third time. So much more stuff, like, about, like, Tom Cruise, again, like, like I said, he's definitely, despite being, like, literally one of the biggest mega office box office stars, he still, I don't know, he gives it a good performance, great performance. And yeah, I just love the kind of, I know I've said this term a million times, but a fly on the wall type aspect of him trying to, like, sneak his way into this esoteric society. And obviously there's lots of allusions to the Rothschilds and the Illuminati, and it's kind of like kind of depressing in a sense, because it's like class differences, very much in the same way Parasite does. Like, it illustrates class differences in such a unique way of, like, like the way, and if any of you've seen Rob Ager's videos on this is where kind of I'm getting most of the meat and potatoes of the analyses of these, because he's just great. You should go subscribe to him. Shout out to Rob Ager. He does, like, a very good cohesive analysis and criticism on all the symbols, semiotics, metaphors, and even down to like the masks, like the very things, and it's a little bit more like it's not quite the almost cartoonish type way you'd imagine the Rothschilds or stuff like David Icke, maybe, not to like throw him under the bus or anything, because for all he knows he could be telling the truth, and it's it's easy to say haha shape-shifting reptile, haha, and laugh it off. But no, I think there's a way of looking into conspiracy theories, definitely, but doing it without kind of turning it into something more cartoonish than it is, because there's so much to it, right? There's so much that we don't know. There's so much. Epistemology only goes so far. We can only go. So, and especially if like it's like the elites are in it, the elites, whoever they are, it's kind of like this vague kind of metaphysical term you throw around. But yeah, it's just absolutely, like like the way that Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman's family, and they're kind of like have a dry spell in their marriage, and he basically goes out and upon her, basically it's like this wonderful first few 10 minutes of it is just great, because you see Nicole Kidman's like flirting with this like Hungarian guy, and Tom Cruise is like also kind of like flirting with these things, so they're kind of like not super interested in each other, but they're there's like this awful spell of like this one kind of like one of like a hired like prostitutes, I think, or an escort for the Ziegler character, who's kind of like like a scummy, kind of like in the vein of those types of powers that be that kind of have, because you see like his mansion, right, and it's just like out of control, and like you go back to Rob Ager, like you see all these different parallels between his movements and like the movements of the red cloaked man at the masked ball, and which is just one of the, just to segue into that precariously, it's just like one of the most haunting, like just like upset, like kind of like upsetting, but you can't keep your eyes away. That's why it's called like Eyes Wide Shut. Like you can, like you want to see it, right? And then there's a bit of like this panopticon type of thing going on too, right? I mean, Cruise's character takes off his mask and everybody sees him, and it's just like takes away the mystery completely, right? I mean, think about like the power to see but not be seen, and that's totally what is going on with this. It's just like, are we being seen and not being seen? Like hashtag deep. So yeah, it just, there's so much, again, there's so many layers to it. I mean, I could potentially do again, but I don't know what else I'd have to say about it. But yeah, it just ends on a very like tragic, dark note, because it's like you don't know, like if somebody has it out for him, and like all of a sudden there's like a kind of Kafka-esque type of situation where the costume store where he rents his cloak, I think the owner of that, his daughter was literally just like like running around with these like like half naked with these like Chinese, like Asian men, and like the next day it's just like, oh, nothing happened. It's just like this like total like dissonance. Is that cognitive dissonance, I guess? It's just like completely just like, what is going on? And like everybody's just like not answering their phones, and like it's just like this, yeah, there's so many things it's different layers to what's going on. It's just crazy. So yeah, final film on the list would be a, darn, I had something that was a tie that I was going to add into there. Dancer in the Dark, directed by Lars von Trier, came out in the year 2000, I think. Now I can make the joke. Starring Björk, the singer, songwriter, Icelandic origin. Semi-surprised to see she had an acting debut in that, and did a great job. Like, I don't know, I just keep saying like there's not many ways to describe somebody giving a great job, because there's so many different layers to acting, obviously, and maybe they hit points, highs and lows, that other actors don't, or actresses don't for that matter, and she seemed to do a very great job of being like emotionally like matched, I guess, like consistent. Yeah. And the way it's filmed is really unique, despite kind of the demons people have with Lars von Trier. Obviously, I guess the elephant in the room being, his alleged. I don't want to say alleged like sarcastically at all. I mean, I'm totally, like it's like you have no reason to not believe it, but again, I haven't like looked too far into it. His abuse of Bjork and the way he treated her, that kind of throws a little bit of a thing. But like going back to the whole thing of like seeing an art for what it is, seeing a work of art, movie, film, or TV show, or reading a book, like it's possible to read Lolita without just it's like without really accepting everything that Humbert believes and the way he the way he lives. So obviously I'd say it's greatly directed, wonderfully acted, and yeah. So yeah, she's like Dancer in the Dark, so it's like Selma, her main character, and she's like immigrated to America sometime in the 60s, and has high hopes of becoming a singer slash dancer performer, kind of like jack of all trades type of thing, getting into entertainment, but she's kind of bogged down by a factory job, and she has a little son, and there's like, it's a very melodramatic type of thing, and I mean that in a good way. It's like, that's why it kind of like divided critics, because like some people are saying, oh, it's so melodramatic, like there's like moments that are so Shakespearean, and it's this classic theater where it's just like so and so breaks their heart, and so and so ends up dead the second later, or they kill themselves, or they shoot themselves. It's like, it's so like, it's obviously like the most outrageous thing possible, but I will say it with it not being for everybody, it just so happened that I liked it a lot. And I just this wonderful soundtrack by Bjork as well, one of my favorite artists also, singer-songwriters as well, but yeah, like it's just like great, like kind of a mixture of making it a musical without it being overbearing, I guess. Let me start by saying I'm not a huge fan of musicals, if at all. I find them like a little bit taxing and kind of like unrealistic in the way they see things. It's like Singing in the Rain, or not just that, but just any musical at all. Like, it's just always like everybody's high octane and this, and or even Breakfast at Tiffany's. As much as like I understand that that's a great, it's Truman Capote, it's a great classic, but Mickey Rooney, and just kidding. But yeah, that was really bad though, horrible. Racial stereotype. But regardless of that, I just never really found musicals that really realistic. Like they're just kind of like a little bit like, ooh, tongue in my cheek, kind of just carrying on lackadaisically in life, and just, oh, I don't know. Aside from La La Land, which I actually liked as well. But yeah, I just never really. Musicals are my thing. So going into this, I didn't really know it was a musical, and I was semi-surprised to find out that people were, this characters are singing and dancing with each other, and Peter Stromere's character was, looking out for Selma, and in a very endearing way, and it just like, yeah, it's just like, and like, yeah, the way it ends is like one of those things where it's just like, really? Like she would like be thrown? Would she really be thrown in jail for that, and really put on the death penalty just for that? I mean, it was like kind of like this weird crime of passion thing where it's like you can't really find out who's at odds, but yeah, just if you suspend logic a little bit and you kind of think, oh, this is like the worst case scenario, then it's just like fantastic film. So yeah, that is all I have. Man, there's gonna be so much dross in this, so much crap. I'm not even gonna add like a little update, house cleaning. How about that? I'm just gonna end it right here, because you know what? It's almost 2 a.m. I've gotta go to bed. Betty buys. But yeah, hope you liked that. And I'm horrible at salutations on this thing because I'm talking to nobody but the collective you, the audience. I swear there's something I'm missing. Definitely high points being Charlie Kaufman on the list. Definitely Fincher. Definitely Kubrick. Paul Thomas Anderson. You know, there's something. Tarkovsky, definitely. Man. Because there's something on there. A movie that I really, really like. I can't put my finger. Richard Linklater. Yes. I'm just going to add this in. Definitely anything by him. Still slowly working my way through his roster. But yeah. Where would you be without Before Midnight, the Before Trilogy, before Sunrise, before Sunset, right? And then Before Midnight, right? Because the first one, they're both him, Ethan Hawke's character, Jesse, falls in love with Julie Delpy's character. I'm trying to do the proper French spelling. Falls in love with Celine, and they have only they have the rest of the day on meeting each other by happenstance on a train and catching each other's eye, and they're like, get on my train, blah blah blah, obviously. So it's before sunrise because they both have to catch their respective planes, I believe, the next morning. So yeah, and then before midnight, they meet up by happenstance again at a bookshop, Paris's Shakespeare Company, which I actually went to. I'm not trying to claim any fame, ooh, look at me, I'm so special, but I just happened to go to France because I was planning to go there, and other surrounding countries, and I was like, yeah, definitely. My sister said, definitely stop by Paris's, if you're in Paris, which you definitely would be, obviously. Go to Shakespeare Company, and it's actually an Englishman owned it, and it's in their family lineage. Actually, they're, I think, the daughter of the main guy who owned it. He was a book enthusiast who moved from England, I think, and started the company. I don't know how I even got there from Before Sunrise. I'm sorry. Basically, yeah, it's I just thought it was really funny, really interesting that this lineage owns that place, and and it was such this nice little clustered but cozy atmosphere. You go in and you can get a espresso on the way out, and you can leave little quotes on the chalkboard, and there's a cat who's so docile, just sitting there, just you can pet the cat while you're reading a book. It's just great. And I was I want to get so many books because there's so many different things I want to read, but I had to keep in mind that I was going to be lugging it back on a flight/trains around, so I had to be I have to think smart. So anyway, and then to cap it off, Before Midnight, which obviously is I think it's each one is consecutively 9 years, right? So I'm just giving details you could just look up anywhere, but I just feel I just want to end it on this note. So each one is 9 years later, and then the last one being Before Midnight, they're both married, have kids, and kind of it's a little bit more, I don't know, they're more younger and idealistic in the foreign ones, but it's just towards the end of it, it does end on a hopeful note, but it is kind of a little bit different of a hopeful note, if that makes sense. They're they're so used to each other that they're kind of, they know one another's kind of idiosyncratic, what makes them tick and all that stuff way down the road. But yeah, it's just great the way that Linklater, he based that off of an actual friendship he had when he stumbled upon this lady who was, I think, I can't remember what her name was, but she they both stumbled upon each other in a shop, I think, of some type of a store of some kind, and they just started talking about life and philosophy and love and death and stuff, and yeah, they just had a very fruitful, literally just a few hour conversation that they danced a lot of meaningful, insightful stuff into, and then it stayed with him for the rest of his life. and obviously gave birth to these movies. So, and it's just very tragic to find that the lady that he talked to and befriended, like he tried to get in contact with her, but she died very sadly in a motorcycle accident. I think within a, like, not too long, like within a year. She was like quite young, in her 20s, I think. So if I find any more information, which I definitely will, I'll add more information about that. But yeah, other Linklater movies definitely are on there. Waking Life, Boyhood. Despite the mixed reviews, I happen to really love it, and some other ones that I still gotta see, Bernie and all that. But I did really love his first movie, Slacker, his first official movie. Kind of gives me hope that like that was made on like a $10,000 budget back in 1989, I think. So, and definitely like a lot of 90s stuff going on too. I just thought, it's like you have this whole entire different thing, these different kind of narrators all popping in and out and like weaving in and out of each other, like of their lives, all within like Houston, I believe, and it's all like very stream of conscious, like a dream state, almost like James Joyce's Ulysses in a way, in the sense that like all these people are kind of like, like they don't necessarily interact with each other directly, but like you kind of see like, kind of reminds me a little bit of R2's Birdman in a sense, like how the camera angles kind of like follows seamlessly. But yeah, I'm running out of stamina here, so I'm gonna end it on that. So thank you for watching. Goodbye.